Let's talk about Michigan football against Michigan State. We came on last week talking about how, it was expected to be a Michigan win and probably by a couple of touchdowns. And they won by, a couple touchdowns, right? I mean, 22
22
points, three of them, pretty
touchdowns,
much.
really.
Yeah. So I felt really good about the defensive performance. They adjusted in game with Keon Coleman, who seemed like he could just jump up and steal the ball from our guys for a minute there. Very good job by DJ Turner on Jaden Reed.
Yep.
Unbelievable job, honestly. And JJ McCarthy did just enough. He's been scrambling a lot more in the last several games, and it was nice to see him use his feet on this game too as well, because I think he's gonna have to run against Ohio State, probably Illinois, because Illinois' defense is also pretty locked down. Hopefully he can coast a little bit against Rutgers. Maybe we even get to see Davis Warren when that game rolls around, if Cade's still not back. And I do have concerns about JJ McCarthy. It seems like we turned him into Cade McNamara with some feet. He's played very conservatively.
I mean, if you watch no one's open. And there's a reason no one's open. Michigan State was doing everything they could to not get boat raced. So they were playing two high safeties every play. And you know what? With Michigan's run game, they're just going to say, all right, cool. I mean, it makes sense why Michigan State would want to do that. Okay. So you're going to avoid more than likely getting completely blown out unless Blake Corum breaks a bunch of tackles, right? Because they didn't allow any big plays, really. The longest play, I think, was like 24 yards, and it was a McCarthy scramble, right? And the longest Blake Corum run was 17 yards, right?
He was biting off 5-yard, 6-yard chunks all the time.
But it's like, okay, it's death by 1,000 cuts in that situation, though, right? It's like, okay, and then you hope it's kind of like the NFL style where, if you're kind of outmanned to an extent, like the Lions last year. They stayed in some games because they just played bend but don't break defense, right? And controlled the ball when they had it on offense, and tried to limit possessions. Essentially, is the way it worked. Now Michigan is fine with that though, because they know if teams are going to sit in a too high shell the whole time, they're going to say, okay, cool, we'll take 6, 7, 5 yards a pop and then just dink and dunk it all the way down the field. The only reason this wasn't a complete blowout on the scoreboard is because they kicked 5 field goals. So, I mean, cool for Jake Moody. He's, on his way to a record probably. I'm sure he's not that far away from the Michigan field goal record, I'm pretty sure. But it's, it's frustrating to watch at times, but at the same time, like, Michigan's never going to be the high-flying Ohio State offense, right? I don't think they want to be. They're never going to be that type of offense.
I think Moody and Corum and Abataconda are at the top in all of NCAA football in points scored.
Corum and Moody is number 1, and Corum is number 2 in the Big Ten. I know that.
I think Abataconda is first out of all of them, though.
Yeah, he leads the nation in
league in touchdowns. Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I got no real complaints other than you got if you can just finish 2 of those drives into touchdowns, and it's a complete and utter destruction on the scoreboard, right? And sure, the style points they might matter a little bit, but in the end, like, they've completely controlled essentially every football game they've played this year. There's been a few, games here and there where they've been pushed, but they really haven't been. I mean, Maryland was the closest thing to being pushed, and that was the first real game they had to play, right? And they've controlled that game. They were up by 2 scores super late in the game, and they just gave up a kind of a garbage time touchdown. So I don't know. I mean, I get it. I get the complaints from fans or from people watching that are like, yeah, he's just checking it down. He's not going deep. But if you watch most of the game, like, he's had some misses for sure. But I think teams are sitting there going, okay, what's the best way that we can beat this team? And they're saying, okay, the way we can beat this team is stop them in the red zone and don't give up any big plays. Because if they get big plays, then the game's over. You saw what happened to Penn State. As soon as they start ripping off the huge runs, the game was – I mean, they were toast, right? Defense is really good, so they know they're not going to score a lot of points on this Michigan defense. And 2, there's a statistic in college football. The team, there's like, I don't know, like 45 teams that average at least two 40, I think it's 35 or 40-yard pass plays per game, right? But there's only like 5 teams that average at least two 40-plus yard run plays, right? And Michigan isn't even one of those 5 teams, right? So what that tells you is statistically, it's much harder to get big plays in the run game than it is in the pass game, right? I think that's pretty evident. It's evident in the NFL, especially. It's probably right to your stat in the NFL. So I think teams are sitting there going, okay, we're not going to give up any big plays, and we're just going to say, beat us by checking it down, and hopefully we get an early lead, and maybe we have to get you out of your game plan. No team's really been able to do that yet, and I agree with you. Like there is going to come a time when you need to see a little more, maybe take a few more chances. But he's moving the team, and they're scoring points, and he's not turning the ball over, which is the biggest key, because that's how you lose that kind of game is. And they did have the one fumble, but that's how you lose that game. You start turning the ball over. I think Michigan eventually, especially later in the game, Jim Harbaugh was probably like, all right, the only way we lose this is if we're really stupid. So we're cool just running the ball on 3rd and 10 and kicking the field goal. Like, it doesn't matter, like, at this point. So I get it. It's kind of old school. And I don't know if it'll always work, against the best teams, but I think they kind of know that. They got a taste of the playoff last year. But it worked against Ohio State last year. So the people that are like, hey, I don't think this will work against Ohio State. I think it will. I'm not saying it's got to be exactly like this. I think it's going to, but a version of this certainly can work against Ohio State. Ohio State showed some vulnerabilities this week too.
Yeah, their defense. I mean, we talked I was rewatching our college football preview, and we both predicted, we'd be undefeated going into all these games. Up until probably Ohio State. We were actually rewatching. We were most concerned about Iowa at Kinnick, and that obviously worked out. But yeah, it just does feel like it's not JJ McCarthy's style to play this kind of football, and that's why it's like, is he still struggling with his injury?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think if he was, I don't think he'd be running him nearly as much. So I think it's just more of like, look, teams are just sitting back in his zone, and he's taking what's there. And yeah, there are times, if you rewatch the games, and you try to, it's hard depending on the camera angles, but if you rewatch some of it, like there are guys open downfield that he's missing too. So I don't think it's always, a play calling thing necessarily. I think sometimes he's just missing, right? Or he's holding the ball. There's been a few times where he's held the ball, not so much lately, but when it's like, dude, there's a guy open like in front of your face. But I think Michigan kind of just understands who they are. And they understand like the strength of this team is the offensive line and the running backs. And then, everything, and the quarterback's feet probably. And then they'll go from there, everything else from there. But they're still very difficult to defend. And they're way more difficult to defend than last year because teams for whatever reason are just deathly afraid of letting Roman Wilson run deep on them. I don't know if that's just because of the early season success he had. He is very fast, but like they're playing some deep safeties over top of him, and we haven't really taken a shot in the last. Oh, I don't know. I can't think of the last time we really took much of a shot. He tried to hit Andrell Anthony a few times a few games ago and he missed him. I don't remember who that was even against. Didn't really take any shots against Penn State. Missed a few against Maryland. I think he missed one against Iowa, but again, like I think teams are just kind of content to sit back a little bit and hope they get a turnover or two, and that might be the best way.
Unfortunately, his deep ball accuracy to me has been. He's like 1 for 6. He's basically Killian Hayes on these drops.
Right, but again, he hasn't thrown very many, so it's like I don't know. It amazes me though because you're right, he hasn't really hit that many yet. Teams aren't really giving up the deep ball. You know what I mean? They're not just selling out to stop the run, which is crazy. Yeah. Right. There's been a bunch of people that have talked about like, why aren't teams just playing 8 in the box? And I think it's because they know like, hey, like this is a huge play waiting to happen if that's the case. Because I'm not saying the Michigan's receivers they're leaving something to be they're not doing the best in the they haven't been the best, but like
Yeah.
I think they realize like, hey, like this year I think they have a quarterback that can actually take advantage of that a little bit more. And with his feet, he can make something happen even if it's not there right away. So I don't know. It's just the teams are defending Michigan really weird. Because against, I mean, I would even say, like back when completely different offense and like the way they run plays, but like back when like Wilton Spate was the quarterback and like Michigan was running over some of these teams, as soon as they faced a pretty good defense that stacked the box, like Michigan struggled, right? Um, and they've not run for less than 165 yards in a game this year.
That's incredible.
So
I mean, there's a reason that Corum is almost unanimously top 3 in Heisman consideration.
Yeah, I think it's probably Hendon Hooker, obviously, Stroud and Corum right now, the top 3, and then I don't know, Caleb Williams maybe. Otherwise,
Bryce Young's tail in the back, yeah.
Young, yeah, but he lost, but he's still got a chance. So I don't know. It's really interesting. They were ranked number 5 in the first college football playoff rankings tonight. Clemson being ahead of them is pretty dumb. I just don't think Clemson's very good. But again, in the end, I think we both kind of even said it. That probably in order to make it, unless the chips fall perfectly, you're just going to have to go undefeated and beat Ohio State. I mean, and win the Big Ten championship. That's pretty
You're still getting into your 6 bowl, probably. I just, even if they lose, they're still going to get one of those top bowl games. But
yeah, do you think? I mean, I don't know. You've watched a little bit of Ohio State. Where do you? I feel better about that game than I ever have to this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think just the way the offense. I mean, it feels like you can beat anyone when your offensive line is going to get pushed, unless you're playing against a line like we played Georgia last year that was just capsuled with NFL talent.
Right.
Like if you've
I don't think there's a line out there like that this year, though.
Yeah, I don't. And I've seen other weaker offensive lines push Ohio State's guys around. Obviously, they've got some talent. Eichenberg is an incredible linebacker, and I think if we can keep popping 4 or 5 yards a carry, and we still kind of make that the focus against Ohio State, it doesn't seem out of line to say that we don't have a chance in that game.
No.
I think it's going to be higher scoring. I don't think we're necessarily used to giving, like we said, we haven't given up more than like 27 points since Maryland.
27 points is the most they've given up.
Yeah, that's Maryland. And
yep.
And so
I think that was the worst game they've played all year. I will say that right now. I think that was the worst game.
Yeah, they played a quality Big Ten quarterback. Obviously quality but 2 of those receivers are probably NFL bound. I think they did just enough in the run game against Michigan where it's like, okay, Michigan can't like sell out on the pass either. So, it'll be interesting because I think also going forward, we're possibly without Jamon Green for a week or 2.
I guess. I don't know. Apparently
we may have to talk about that nasal injury.
Oh yeah. Apparently he's got a concussion. Obviously, he's in the video. You see him getting hit.
And there's now a lawsuit involved. I'm sure from his dad is what I've heard.
Yeah. So.
But no, I mean we'll get to that. But I just this game doesn't the Ohio State game doesn't seem like a lost cause. I think it could be one of those things where it's like we'll have to minimize any and every mistake. Referees are not going to have to be the same ones from JT was short sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I just those things where I struggle. You struggle to call it like feeling confident because I'm never confident going in that game, no matter what records are.
Ohio State's elite. Yeah, you can't.
Right. But I do think, Michigan will be by far the best team Ohio State's played to that point.
And them us. I mean, yeah, and them us.
I do worry about the Illinois game a little bit the week before. Not because I think Michigan will win and probably win easily, but that game's going to be pretty physical. And Illinois is tough, so that can't be one. I'm not saying they've ever like overlooked teams before that game, but like they played Maryland last year before that game and just completely ran them out of off their own field, right? And I don't know, going into that Ohio State game, that could be a tough one versus Ohio State plays. I think they play. Who do they play? Wisconsin, who is garbage this year in that game. So be a little more of a sleepwalk through that. But and Ohio State plays Northwestern this year. I think the Big Ten is obviously as a whole is just not helping either of those two teams this year. Even last year, Penn State was definitely a test for both of them, and they both passed. Michigan probably passed even better. Definitely passed it with better grade than Ohio State. But the West is terrible. Besides Illinois, Wisconsin's usually good, and they're terrible. Michigan State is horrendous this year. Northwestern might only win one game this year. I mean, it's bad. So I don't know. Like I don't know. They will be kind of one of those weird teams. I think that's kind of where the committee's at too. Probably why Michigan's ranked at 5. Ohio State's 2, but why Michigan's ranked 5? It's like I don't know. They don't know, and the non-conference schedule is kind of weak. So I don't know. I think it's just one of those games. Now you look ahead. I mean, now we're looking ahead, obviously, but I don't see either team coming close to a loss before. So, but Illinois is ranked 16th, though.
Yeah, and I anticipate they'll probably still move up again before we play them.
Yeah, so that could be a top 12 win for Michigan before the Ohio State game. So that could certainly help. So we will see for sure.
That Rutgers game, I mean, obviously not loaded with talent. They've got the jack of all trades, Johnny Langan, who play Wildcat QB, tight end, fullback, whatever. And then you got Aaron Cruikshank, who's obviously been a good wide receiver in the Big Ten for a while. And Noah Vedril's probably starting this game.
Nope, Gavin Wimsatt.
You think it's Gavin Wimsatt?
Asciano announced it yesterday.
Really?
Yeah.
Good for Gavin. Good for Gavin.
He started the last game and then got concussed and left.
But he passed concussion protocol. Good for him.
Apparently. So
I guess beat up the freshman now while you can, right?
If you look at his stats, he's been very bad this year, though.
Well, I mean, Evan Simon and Noah Vedril haven't been anything to smile at either. But
no, they have one of the worst quarterback situations in the Power 5.
I do remember Avery Young. I do remember playing him in the past. He's a very good safety. I think he's going to be an NFL player. But other than that, I look at the rest of this defense, and outside of Deion Jennings, and Avery Young, it's not a good defense.
It's a pretty bad team. They had some upperclassmen and some transfers and some guys last year that could keep them. They weren't really in. I mean, they gave Michigan a tough game, but they weren't really in too many games last year. But they were closer, right? They were like, you could see maybe they were building something. This year they're kind of a dumpster fire again. They are well coached. I mean, I don't like Greg Schiano necessarily, but I think he is a good coach and he's been around. You see coaches that are well organized and know what they're doing. You see it across the country. Even UConn's like a win away from bowl eligibility or 2 wins away from bowl eligibility, right? And they consider one of the worst teams in the FBS, but they've got a coach that semi knows what he's doing in Jim Mora, and you suddenly get, you've got a team that.
Well, that's another reason why Illinois come out of nowhere. I mean, obviously, he's done it for a long time too. So
Bielema knows what he's doing. It's obvious. So you see the coaches that are good, even in bad situations, they look competent on the field. They look organized at the very least, right? And Rutgers, to me, anytime I watch them play, they look organized. They don't look like when who was it? Chris Ash was the coach before, I think, right? Mm-hmm. That looked like a bad high school team at times. That looked so bad. They aren't that bad, but they're not good. And they've got a lot of young guys, and they're bad this year. And they're kind of in that struggle now when you're trying to build a team, especially in the tough division where if you graduate any of your better players, like you're going to struggle that next year. They're kind of where Northwestern is, where it's like, oh, they're good every 3 years or so, right? But when they're young, they're terrible.
So I'm thinking this game's probably 17-7 at halftime. I'm not to slight Michigan too much. I just think Rutgers usually gives a pretty good fight to start out. But I think at the second half, I think Michigan will outscore them 24-3, and I think the final score is going to be 41-10.
It's a good pick. I'm going to go with 56 to 7.
Okay.
I know that's a huge blowout.
No, that's totally viable.
Michigan hasn't been putting up that type of – mostly because they haven't been getting the bigger plays in the passing game lately. But I think they outmatched
I
Rutgers.
also think they're going to simplify their playbook just because, again, you're not going to show too much before you're playing a competitor like Illinois and Ohio State. I know you still have Nebraska in between that, but I don't think you want to get carried away in the playbook either. So I don't know how much they're going to be like.
I mean, I just think they can beat them with their base right now, and I do think Michigan's going to kind of be, because it's interesting. I know we didn't talk about the tunnel and all that really, but I think they're going to kind of be re-energized out of that because if you hear the interviews, they were pretty, traumatized is maybe the word, but they were kind of pretty shaken up over that, right, and just frustrated. And if they can kind of come out of that and have it be kind of a rallying cry for the rest of the season, I think that's what they will do. Just on knowing how that team is kind of built, and being ranked fifth, they could look at that as a little bit of a slight. I mean, I think they should at least be in the top four.
Yeah.
They've taken care of business. They haven't really been pushed, right? And Clemson's been pushed, and they say, oh, well, they played some good teams. The teams they played have not been that good. So I don't know. I think this could be kind of one of those games where they kind of hit their stride. Hopefully, maybe get JJ going a little bit more. But again, I'm not going to sit there and be a stat guy with him. If he's taking care of the football and making the plays that are there, I'm going to take it. Especially this first year as a starter. Yes, you want progression.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's kind of what I was thinking about when you were saying that. It was just like, yeah, so did Cade McNamara. JJ McCarthy is another specimen of a quarterback, and
100%.
I think it's not. I think it's shy to say that he shouldn't take some chances sometimes with the ball.
Sure, and I think that's fine. And to me, though, at this point, it's one of those things where it's like there's a time and a place, right? So, like in a game where the only way this other team is going to win is if you are lazy and careless with the ball, then sure, then you're a little more cautious, right? The Michigan State, the only way they're going to win that game is if they get some turnovers, right?
Yep.
Against bad teams, the only way they're going to win that game is if turnovers happen, right? But I agree, there needs to come a time where you kind of take that as a coaching staff or as himself from a confidence standpoint, you got to kind of just let it rip a little bit, right? And I think we'll see it eventually, but I don't know if you're going to see a lot of it like this year, right? He's still learning how to play. People got to remember he's 19, right? He's got all the talent in the world.
Yeah, he's not Hendon Hooker, 25 years old.
Right. I mean, and he's going to grow and he's going to figure this thing out. He will eventually figure it out, and they'll put more on him and more on him and more on him, and he'll have it figured out. But his really good game is going to still look different than the CJ Stroud really good game. You know what I mean? Just because of the nature of Michigan's offense, I don't think, we're going to see JJ throwing for 400 yards consistently. It's just not going to happen. Now, could you see 300, and then running for 50 or something like that, or two, even 250?
I think in part of it being a stat guy is if he wants Heisman consideration next year, I think it's going to have to be expected to average 275 with 50 rush yards a game.
Yeah, and I don't think he cares about that. I'll be completely honest, but it's one of those things where you see the talent and you're like, hey, he could do this, right?
Yeah.
If you watch,
he's a specimen. He's like a 4.
He's not
5. He's a
Wilton Speight. You're not sitting there going. You weren't expecting Wilton Speight to go for 350 plus any game, right? Mm-hmm. But to me, if you're JJ, if you're 250 plus yards, then you're doing something great because he's been under 200 the last 2 weeks.
Yeah,
but he's still done what they've still won the game handily. So yeah. I don't know. It's interesting. It's kind of